Welcome to Think Diverse, a fresh and deep look at the issues surrounding diversity and inclusion. I'm your host, Catherine De Vries, and I'm a Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at Bocconi University. In every episode, I will pick the brain of one of my Bocconi colleagues about their research about diversity and inclusion. This all to understand how diversity manifests itself in our daily lives, our society, and our economy. Today, we enter a world that's largely invisible to the wider public. The shantytowns in the Italian countryside. Shantytowns are places where marginalized West African farm workers have created a parallel society out of necessity. Simone Cremaschi, postdoctoral research fellow at the Bocconi Dondena Center, has investigated how these places really work. And he received a distinguished research prize for his path-breaking research. Today, he will share his insider perspective with us. Simone, thanks for joining us here at Think Diverse.
Thank you for having me, Catherine. It's great to be here.
So first off, what actually made you study the topic of shantytowns in Italy?
Well, I must say, Catherine, that this was not planned at all. So I've been interested in the conditions of immigrants here in Italy since the times of my master that I did here at Bocconi. But I was used to study these issues in a kind of aseptic way, doing data analysis behind the screen of my computer. Then, during the summer of the first year of my PhD at the European University Institute, I read on the newspaper about a group of activists that were running a radio called Radio Ghetto Voci Libere in a huge shantytown inhabited by West African farm workers near Foggia, a town in Apulia. And these workers were living in this place while picking tomatoes in the harvest. I decided that this was really interesting and I decided to go there. And when I arrived there, this place was so different from what I imagined. And there were so many things that I could not understand. That I decided that this should be my research and that I should start living there and collect the data I needed myself.
So you already mentioned that for you, these shantytowns differed very much from your image that you had previously. So could you maybe explain a bit how you think shantytowns actually differ from the image that maybe Italian people or people abroad might have about them?
Well, the first thing that we should say is that most people in Italy and also abroad don't even know that these places exist, right? So we are speaking about really towns built with cardboard and plastic, where thousands of people live in the countryside, isolated from Italian towns, without access to any basic facility, to water, to electricity. And these places are located mostly in the south, near Foggia or in Calabria, in Sicily, but there are also some smaller ones in the north. And in these places, immigrants have built basically everything. They have built restaurants, bars, shops. You can even buy a car if you want, even though probably you could not circulate with it. And what the newspapers usually say when they speak about these places is that these places are a kind of prison camp where immigrants are held by force and are treated as slaves in a way. And it's certainly true that the people who work in these places experience terrible working conditions. But what you see when you go there is that there is actually a lot of action going on. The people who go there because they must find a strategy to survive the poverty and the marginalization that they experience in Italy, and they put a lot of effort in finding the best way to do it. And I think that this is something that is not acknowledged in the image that newspapers give of these places.
Yeah, so that's clear. I wanted to ask you also, so is there a particular number or statistic that you can remember that gives you actually a better picture of the place?
So talking about numbers when we talk about these places, it's always very difficult because these people are really invisible to statistics. They are not registered in many ways. So we don't know much about the numbers, but I can give you a number that I obtained by collecting data myself with surveys in all the main shantytowns that are in Italy. And this is the number of undocumented people, of people who are living in Italy without a regular residence permit. Usually Italian people who think about these shantytowns think that these places are populated exclusively by undocumented immigrants. In fact, in my data, you can see that the percentage of people that doesn't have regular documents, it's only the 23%. This is more than double than the estimates of undocumented immigrants during that year, that was 2017 in Italy, but it's still quite a minority on the total population of the shantytowns. And what does this tell us? This tells us that there is a large number of workers who are earning too little to afford standard housing in town and have to live there while working for us and to make possible that fresh food arrives on our table. And I think this is a huge problem we should think about.
Now, and definitely. Do you think also, so you mentioned that a big part of that they don't have enough means or not enough money to maybe buy a house, to rent a house or to have housing within a city. Do you also think that discrimination plays a role?
Yes, I think that there are many reasons that prevent these people to access houses in town. One of these is, of course, money. But discrimination is another important element. Many of the people I talked to reported how they could not even think about renting a house in town because Italian owners would not accept having an African person living in their flat.
So you mentioned already a little bit what shantytowns look like, that there might be shops, that there might be a restaurant, that you might even be able to buy a car there. So they might look more similar to normal towns, quote unquote, than many Italians or people from abroad would expect. Now I wanted to ask you also a little bit about the larger environment in which we can find these shantytowns. And that particularly of the kind of economic environment. So how do you think that the agricultural economy of the areas that you visited and the shantytowns are placed depend on the exploitation of immigrant farm workers there?
So you asked me to enlarge the view, so I will enlarge it even more. And I will talk a bit about how the agricultural sector in Italy, but also in Europe and in the Mediterranean area, has changed over the last years. The agricultural economy has globalized, and this brought to us consumers a lot of advantages because food prices now are much lower than before. But this, on the other side, means that employers have to find workers that are willing to accept lower and lower wages. And oftentimes, these workers are nowadays immigrants. So the last estimates that we have of the percentage of the agricultural workforce in Italy that takes into consideration also the unregistered part of the workforce, which is a very important one, is from 2015 and says that about the 48% of the agricultural workforce in Italy was made of immigrants. This means that nowadays we cannot do without immigrant workers and that we should find ways to guarantee decent working conditions to everyone.
So it's actually important to remember when we eat food where that food might come from, as you just alluded to. You just talked a little bit about the agricultural economy and the extent to which it relies on the immigrant farm workers. So I would imagine that a lot of these immigrant farm workers work in harvests, for example, that they help picking fruits or vegetables. But are there, could you say a little bit more about the life of immigrant farm workers in general, and also what they might do outside of the picking season?
Sure. So in my research, this is an important part of my research actually. I show that there are two groups of people living in these places. The first one, that is the majority, is people who stay there just for the harvest and then move to towns in Italy or in other European countries, and there tries to build a better life, living in marginal arrangements that are similar in terms of living conditions to those who are experienced in shantytowns, because oftentimes they live on the streets or in train stations, in homeless shelters, maybe in reception centers, or if they are lucky, at the house of a friend or of a family member. There, they try to find better job opportunities, and they hope that this will allow them one day to build a stable life in Europe. There is another group, though, that has decided to withdraw from this extremely challenging search that the majority of people is doing, and has decided to withdraw into shantytowns and live there on a long term. This allows them to survive for the whole year on very little money, but also gives them a kind of meaning in the fact of staying in Italy in very poor condition, because they can say, okay, I'm here, I'm poor, I'm excluded from society, but I am able to live on my own means, and I have my own house, and I'm independent. I'm proud of it.
So you mentioned that actually part of your research was to move away from your computer and actually go to these shanty towns and spend time with immigrant farm workers there. And I was wondering, is there a particular person that you met during your research that really left an impact on you?
So all the people that live in these places and that I met has made such a great impact on me that I think to mention one, it would be really, really difficult. So rather than telling you about a person in particular, I think I will tell you about an episode that was really important for me. So it was March 2017, and I had just arrived in Foggia on the day in which Gran Ghetto, the main shantytown where I had been spending time until that moment, had been evicted. The police had arrived and had razed the place to the ground. There had been a huge fire, and 2 people that were living there had died during the night. And I had spent the last days just helping the people I knew, moving with all the little things that they had saved from this fire to another shantytown nearby. So on that day, it happened to be my birthday, and I was there without any Italian friends, without knowing anyone in Foggia. And it was very natural for me to say to the people who had been living in Gran Ghetto, why don't we throw a party for my birthday together? And they said, sure, but you cook. So I bought pasta for everyone and brought it to the new shantytown and cooked pasta for 15 people in their shack. And people there were so happy because they told me they would have never imagined that an Italian white person would come there and celebrate his birthday with them. It was for them the first moment after many years that they had been living in Italy that they would feel to have an Italian friend. And when I arrived, they had all put some money to buy some beers for me, because in this way I could cheer for my birthday, even though none of them would drink alcohol. So why I think this episode is so important? First, because it tells us about the deep racism that these people experience in Italian towns. Most of them were telling all the time about how people on the streets would change side of the street when they would meet them because they were scared of crossing the street of a black man. But on the other hand, it also tells us something about the generosity that these people display toward foreigners. During my fieldwork, I spent so many nights in the shack, in the houses of these people, sharing the same bed with these people, sharing the same meal that they were offering me, even if they were living on so poor money. And this, I think, is something that I bring with me and that I will try to replicate for what I can in all my life.
So from this answer, it also becomes clear that each individual can do something just also by acknowledging the presence of a different person, not, moving on the other side of the street, or actually also trying to maybe provide resources or do something in their daily lives. But I just wanted to also think a little bit about what we could structurally as a society do in order to deal with this issue. So how could authorities, associations, civil society act in order to really put an end to, shameful exploitation of immigrant farm workers in certain parts of Italy?
So I think that, of course, we are talking about a very difficult problem that has no easy solution. I think that the first thing that should be done is to realize that we are facing two problems that are quite different and require specific solutions. So on the one hand, we have the problem of farm workers who need to find temporary housing in decent conditions. They have to find contracts that guarantee their work conditions and a transport system that in this moment is lacking, and they must have access to it. On the other hand, we are facing the problem of a huge mass of people that is excluded from basic rights in Italy. They lack access to residence permit. They lack the minimum amount of money to feed themselves and find a house. And for this, what we have to think as a society is how to include people that are not native citizens in our welfare system and make possible for them to contribute to our society and realize themselves as they wish.
So, this is a very important point about how to provide basic public services and social welfare provision for immigrant farm workers. But do you think there's also a role for consumers when it comes to dealing with this issue?
So I think there is a role for consumers in the sense that, of course, when we buy our food, we can always pay attention to what are the producers that are more attentive to the rights of their workers. I believe that the biggest role is still for politics, and that a good system of law and regulation could really solve this problem entirely.
Coming to an end of our conversation, but Bocconi's motto is knowledge that matters. So how do you think your research matters?
So I think that my research matters because it can give to policymakers a better understanding of the issues that immigrant farm workers live in our countrysides, and these findings can help to build better targeted policies that can help to put an end to these shameful conditions.
Thank you very much, Simone, for explaining your research to us. Thank you all for listening. This was Think Diverse, a podcast on diversity and inclusion from Bocconi University. To be notified about new episodes, Subscribe to Think Diverse on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, or Spreaker.